Hello, everyone. My name's Charlie Sedkamp. I am from Cincinnati, Ohio. This is my 5th summit. I am part of the state leadership team in the onboarding process. So, by the way, if you guys want to know more about us, obviously look us up on the website, and it'll probably be me calling you. Or if you just see anybody here today with the staff, don't be afraid to come up and talk to us, ask us what we're about, what we're doing, and if you want to get more involved, please don't be afraid, to do so. It is my pleasure to introduce the panel on the American economy, how unchecked executive power affects the market. First, we have Will Reinhardt, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where his research is focused on political, economic, and technological changes coming with AI. Next is Justin Woofers, a professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan. His research spans labor, macroeconomics, political economy, and social policy. Then we have Jessica Riedel. Currently, Jessica is a budget and tax fellow at the Brookings Institution. She was also a leading and budget tax research fellow at the Manhattan Institute, as well as the Heritage Foundation. Rounding out the panel is Francis Fukuyama of Stanford University, where he serves as an Oliver, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, Nomellini, senior fellow and faculty member of the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies, Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law. Please welcome them to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to start with a couple opening comments, and then we'll get into questions. So, Justin, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off.
Sure. So, wow, what a day yesterday was. And I think what's nice about it is that we can all celebrate, and we can all celebrate, like, if I were a Republican, and by Republican I mean someone who was dedicated to a republic as opposed to a monarchy, I wasn't being funny. I would think it's good that the Supreme Court says you have to go through Congress. If I were a conservative, someone who wanted to conserve the foundations of American prosperity, the fact that we took a step back to conserving those foundations would be good. If I were a Reagan-Bush free trader, the fact that we moved a step closer to that would make me happy. If I were a libertarian, the fact that we've taken the yoke of government away from our throats as we try to figure out who and when and where we don't just want to love but also do business with, I would be thrilled. If I were an internationalist, the fact that we have the opportunity to come closer to people from all around the world would make me happy. If I were focused on the global poor and the developing world, the fact that the largest economic power in the world might be open for business with those who need it most would make me happy. If I were a Democrat, the fact that we might be getting rid of an incredibly regressive form of taxation would thrill me. But really, I'm an economist. And I teach Economics 101. And so if we take a step back from tariffs and a step forward to sanity, I think we've all got a lot to celebrate. So I am just going to suggest we all enjoy the moment.
Strong opener. Jessica, please. Yeah, can you even...
Tough act to
I know,
follow.
right?
I'm going to assess the Trump economy, and I'm going to be fair by opening with the good economic news. Top-line GDP, unemployment, and inflation rates are muddling along okay so far. The S&P is rising, although less than the global index. Now that we've got the good news out of the way, the economic threats are real and many. Tariffs are raising prices, paralyzing business investment, alienating allies, and harming the very manufacturing sector that they're supposed to be helping. We face upside inflation risk from tariffs, immigration restrictions, tax cuts, spending hikes, and Trump pressuring the Fed to cut rates. Economic growth forecasts are sluggish due to immigrant worker deportations, labor force growth trending towards zero, and middling productivity. The economy created just 181,000 jobs last year. That's 1/10 of the average rate over the last decade. And employers have the fewest job openings posted since before the Great Recession. Housing starts and residential construction spending are falling sharply. We have crony capitalism and government taking steps to partially nationalize major companies. I'm only about half done with these. Consumer confidence is at a 12-year low. Real personal disposable income has not grown since the tariffs. The Fed is over-politicized and risking inflation. Budget deficits are heading to $4 trillion a year under current policy within a decade, and that's with low interest rates. Social Security and Medicare are on pace to push the debt to 250% of GDP in 3 decades. Washington has based its entire long-term budget projections on the interest rate paid on their bonds not rising ever above 3.8%. And we're doing bond auctions right now at 4.5. So much of these costs are the result of giving an economically illiterate president nearly unchecked power over economic policy. Our Madisonian founders assumed that all 3 branches would compete for power and check each other. Instead, Washington coalitions divide by party instead of by branch, with no checks. So when one party sweeps into power, it governs together across all 3 branches without any legitimate checks on it. That leaves a political system unwilling to act even in a constitutional crisis. Consequently, the last thing I'll say on this is it leaves us with a Congress that is largely ceremonial. It does not want to exercise any power that would anger the executive and his voters. It refuses to assert its constitutional authority on tariffs. It allows DOGE and OMB to illegally impound funds. It stands by idly while the president threatens to throw the Fed chairman in prison and rig economic data. And it confirms totally unqualified hacks to the cabinet. This is all combustible for the economy and for the nation. And we got our work cut out for us.
Okay.
Yeah. How can we?
Right.
Let's continue this vibe, right?
So, as the only non-economist on this panel, I thought I'd talk about the interaction of economics and politics. I want to make 3 points. First is about institutions. The second is about the politicization of economic policy. And the third is about the economization of political policy. So, with regard to institutions, Trump, I think everybody recognizes, is not an institutionalist. He likes to undermine institutions. But I think that people don't quite understand what it means when he's called transactionalist. It means that so an institution is a rule. It's a rule that survives the individual that formulated that rule, and it has a big effect on the structure of societies subsequently. Trump has operated by executive orders. This Congress has been one of the least productive Congresses, and that's how you make your mark on a society, is by actually passing laws that will survive your administration. And so there's kind of a good side and a bad side to being a transactional president. The good side is that anything that's done by an executive order can be undone by an executive order. And it does not create a permanent, legislative path forward. The bad part is that it gives the particular president in question unlimited discretionary power to use that in any way he chooses, and that opens the door to monumental levels of corruption. My favorite example of this was Switzerland. So Switzerland, he had a talk with the Swiss president. He didn't like her tone, so they get a 37% tariff rate, and then they give him a nice Rolex clock and a gold bar, and all of a sudden he decides to lower the tariff rate, to 15%. right? And so it's completely personalized decision-making that this transactionalism leads to. Now, the politicization of economic policy, I think, I don't need to give you examples. One of the things I'm actually worried about that regards AI is the increasing degree to which AI itself is becoming a political football in the United States. It's actually kind of split the MAGA coalition, but you could end up in a few years with one party basically being pro-AI and the other being against it. But these kinds of political considerations have infected, many areas of decision-making. But I would say, from my standpoint as a political scientist, one of the worst things is the economization of political decision-making. If you've been following the negotiations on the Ukraine-Russia war, the Russians have basically offered some ridiculous, like $10 trillion of economic benefits. Now, the fact that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are the two American negotiators, these two developer businessmen types, they are actually guiding these negotiations with regard to the economic benefits, not that would necessarily accrue to the United States if there's a deal and the Russian economy is now open to American business, but how they would benefit personally, which is what Jared Kushner took great advantage of in the first Trump administration. And so I think that the introduction of this kind of personal economic self-interest into diplomatic policy making is, for obvious reasons, really, really bad. And I think it's going to set a precedent that we're going to see many more examples of before the day is done.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. So, Justin, beginning with you, you talked a little bit about it, right? Learning resources, the tariff case went up to Supreme Court. I've been following it pretty closely because it hits a whole bunch of different, legislative and legal issues that I follow very closely. I was wondering if you could just kind of walk us through how this came about and the general decision that came down yesterday.
You want me to talk about the law?
Yeah. I mean, you can't have all of the lawyers doing it, right?
It's even better than that. You can probably tell from my accent, I never took civics in high school.
We don't teach it anymore, so.
And if they teach it, they don't learn it.
Yeah.
As I understand it, this was, the founding document says that Congress has the power to tax. The founding story of this country, and I am not the one to tell it, is of wanting the people rather than the supreme leader to decide the rules of taxation. Tariff is a tax. That's not an opinion. That's a definition in a textbook. I wrote the textbook. So it's clear Congress owns the right to tariff. Congress understands Congress is very bad at doing congressional work. So Congress, in its wisdom in the past, has given the White House certain powers because the White House can typically be more nimble. We're about to discover a lot about what those powers were. What they weren't was the Emergency Powers Act. The Emergency Powers Act is an act that allows certain forms of sort of economic stuff, technical word, to do when there's emergencies. Two problems here. It doesn't use the word tariff, and there's not an emergency. The Supreme Court only ruled on the first of those, which is if Congress meant to give away the right to tariff or tax, they would have used the word tariff. Where we are now then is the Emergency Powers Act is gone. So in terms of tariffs, the Emergency Powers Act was used to impose tariffs on countries. Think about tariffs, you can be horizontal across a whole country. That was the horizontal. That was the Emergency Powers Act, that's gone. There's a bunch of other powers that they did delegate that are legitimately delegated. Congress could take back at any point in time their vertical, their thin slices of the economy, their particular industries, national defense, unfair trade practices, things like that. That's where the administration's going to go now. Those powers are very, very clunky. They take a long time. They're boring. They require doing some work. So we're not sure they're going to use them. What the president did do yesterday, though, there is an old law that looks like it's probably okay, but I'm not a lawyer, that says you can, when there's a balance of payments crisis, again, I'm not sure there is one, you can put tariffs of up to 15%. He went to 10 on the rest of the world, or on perhaps maybe just on countries with which you have a trade deficit, but it's up to 150 days, and then Congress gets involved, and Congress doesn't like any of what he's doing. So that paints the landscape. I just want to end with one analytic point. A 150-day tariff is the dumbest idea yet. So you can be for or against tariffs, but think about how much bargaining power you get. Think about the president trying to call Mark Carney and say, you have to do this or else I'll impose tariffs on you. And Mark Carney saying, I can count to 150. Or if the idea of these tariffs is to onshore manufacturing, the president has ensured that it's going to be much more profitable to be an American manufacturer for 150 days. Good luck building a plant and taking advantage of that. So what that means is the president's actions yesterday are one of two things. They're a tantrum, or they're simply attacks. And they're probably both.
Yeah, and just to be clear, man, I wish I got that kind of applause. Just to be clear, thank you very much. Yeah, please clap. Just to be clear, yeah. So I just want to make some of the other, since I follow this also pretty closely. The things that have not been changed are some of the steel and aluminum tariffs under the Trade Expansion Act, and some of the other trade practices dealing with China under the Trade Act of 1974. So those things could be and could provide like a base for new expansion of powers. But of course, so anyway, putting a pin in that, Jessica, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the impact of tariffs on individual households, right? That I see all this data, and somebody who is an economist, you read this and you see, for example, Yale Budget Lab estimated that the tariffs cost the average household $3,800, right? That's a lot of money. I could do a lot with $3,800. And when you see this, what worries you the most? Is it the cost itself, the kind of the distribution of it, which we see is pretty regressive, or is it the total kind of uncertainty that this entire regime creates, right? What is it that, if you could rank them, what are the things that you worry about and that concern you?
Oh boy. Well, the first thing is you're seeing a lot of debate online about whether the tariffs have actually raised prices, and certain commentators online on television who just have a PhD in English from Berkeley and no economic training are suggesting that the tariffs are not raising prices at all. If that was the case, then why would we have the tariff? The whole point of the tariff is to make imports so expensive that we stop importing them and substitute in domestic alternatives. So even if they're true, great. Let's get rid of the tariffs. They haven't worked. Of course the tariffs are raising prices. One of the examples you can look at is housing construction costs have risen. And that's one of the reasons housing starts are dipping, and residential home construction spending is down at an annualized rate of about 6.7%, because we import lumber from Canada. We import a lot of materials, inputs from China. The prices are going up, housing construction is falling. In terms of the cost of the tariffs, I've seen all different numbers. I believe the Tax Foundation says it's closer to about $1,000 per household. Either way, the Chinese are not paying the cost of the tariffs, we are. And what we're told is, okay, fine, we're all paying for tariffs, we're eating the cost, but this is really important to save the United States manufacturing sector. We all have to sacrifice to help manufacturing. Well, in the last year, we've lost 108,000 manufacturing jobs after adding 156,000 during the previous 3 years. So the argument of, well, we're always losing manufacturing jobs, we gained the previous 3 years. We lost 108,000 last year. We've pretty much spent the last year in a manufacturing recession. So when the very industry that we're all paying and sacrificing to help is itself suffering, then what are we even doing here? President Reagan, used to make the line about somebody, the child who gets the big pile of manure for Christmas, and he dives in excited, and they go, why are you excited? And he said, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. I look at tariffs and go, if manufacturing is collapsing, then where's the pony? Where is the benefit that we're all sacrificing for? And so ultimately, I'm baffled about what the tariffs are meant to accomplish. If they're meant to solve the trade deficit, well, the trade good deficit went up. If they're meant to solve individual country trade deficits, we're slapping tariffs on countries where we have a trade surplus like Brazil. If they're meant to be a temporary negotiating tool, how can you turn the dial so much? And if so, how can you count on the revenue long term? If you're meant to encourage domestic manufacturing, who's going to do manufacturing investments, as Justin said, on a 150-day tariff? The reason we have tariffs, after all that, is because Trump likes tariffs. That's it. He just likes them. There's no logic behind them at all, and we're paying.
Actually, I don't think that's quite right. I think that tariffs are very useful in acquiring territory like Greenland. It's an instrument that we didn't have previously.
So Frank, following up on that, the topic of this panel is how concentrated power can distort economic decision making. You've written a lot about this idea of vetocracy, which I have cribbed and used in many cases. And part of that is really that there is almost kind of this opposite effect, right? That all of the excessive veto points in the United States, the fact that you have many different organizations and agencies that you have to get agreement from. Prime example is what happens in San Francisco, right? If you want to start a new business, there are 20 different agencies or so that you actually have to get agreement from before you start that business. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this, right? About this notion of vetocracy and how it plays into the sense of economic decision making, how it can distort these things, and what do you think are some of the best examples of it?
Well, I think the best example is in building infrastructure, where we have this very complex system on a municipal, state, and federal level, where you have a lot of stakeholders that are given the opportunity to block, let's say, infrastructure projects that they don't like. And this is one of the reasons that we've got this big infrastructure deficit. Now, it's a complicated thing that because it is so hard to actually move forward, like in California, we've got this law called CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. All 40 million of us residents of California can launch a lawsuit against any project we don't like. We can do it anonymously with no statute of limitations. And it really makes it hard to do things like build, California high-speed rail. And I think that actually, if you think about the rise of Trumpism and Muskism, Doge and so forth, there's been so much frustration at the, in a way, the overregulation and the, all the hoops you have to jump through, the legal hoops, that it gives rise to, someone like Trump that says, okay, I'm just going to ignore the law. The law is too constraining, and I'm just going to do whatever I want. And I think that it's this very unhealthy interaction between, a political system that's made it very, very difficult to come to collective decisions on important things that are of, common interest, that then gives rise to this populist, response that says, let's just get rid of rules altogether. And I think what a group like this needs to think about is how you actually cut back on some of those veto points and make it possible to do things like, build transmission lines and high-speed rail and so forth, without going to the, the Trump extreme of just saying, just the hell with all law. Rule of law is just a constraint, and I'm just going to ignore it. And by the way, that spills over into things like Minnesota, where, you're arresting people and deporting them without due process and so forth.
Just to follow up a little bit on that, something I've been following closely is this Yes in My Backyard, the YIMBY movement. Do you think that the politics that are driving this reaction, right, is in California, we've seen the rise of this movement. As a political scientist, do you think that this creates kind of a new political awareness? Does it create kind of a new political coalition? Do you think that that's going to be durable over time, just generally speaking?
Well, it's been interesting. I'm a big fan of the abundance movement. I mean, I actually think that we ought to get to a point where we can build things again in this country. One of the encouraging things I've seen is that there are actually abundance groups in a lot of campuses, including mine at Stanford, where you do have a lot of people saying, yeah, we ought to be able to use government power in a positive way. The trouble is that there are so many entrenched actors out there that are intent on defending, their positions. And in fact, Donald Trump said this amazing thing last week. He said, I'm actually going to protect existing homeowners. We don't want affordable housing because that's going to drive the price of your house down, right? I mean, he's actually ended up on the side of all these entrenched interests. And so I don't know how this is going to work out. It's going to be a very, very tough political fight to actually get, to break the hold of, some of these particular stakeholder groups.
Yeah, I have so many more questions. Unfortunately, we're going to be coming up on time here shortly, so I kind of want to go to the last question for everyone here on the panel. If you could change one institution, one statute, or one doctrine to improve all of this decision-making or accountability, what would you do? What would be the kind of narrow thing that you would do, or even big thing that you would do?
I would have a Congress.
So, how do we do that? What are some ideas? What's your over and under, right? What should we be doing in order to reinvigorate Congress? I mean, there's lots of demands. My colleagues have been calling for, Congress reassertion. I have a, colleague, Yuval Levin, who has done a lot of work on this. What do you think is the way to reenact that or to reanimate Congress?
You've just done something totally unfair. I had a line that was funny and accurate. And now you want details.
Yeah, no, I do want details. I guess I'm too much of a policy wonk.
And it's the claim was much more political than economic, so I'm going to defer to Frank deeply. I'm going to answer a slightly different question, which is what could I do? What I can do as an economics teacher is I can teach the world economics. And I think that if you look at some of our debates where we're seeing wins, it's because we are having conversations. And we're having conversations and people are understanding. It's hard to believe the president is 2-to-1 underwater on tariffs right now. Tariffs are the sort of thing that just sounds so great. You get to demonize other people who have different colored skin, and it almost always polls well. And the president has fundamentally failed. And I, as an economist, take pride that I think my tribe has done well in having those conversations. And that then means everyone here, it's not that I only teach 500 kids a year, but it's that, we talk and then you're going to be at your family dinner and you'll be at the bus stop and so on. And so I guess this is how you can tell that I come from liberal Ann Arbor. I guess I think I'm saying something like, boy, we all have to be a little more active and a little more informed.
Yeah. Jessica.
I think the lesson of the current political moment is that it's not a matter of this rule or this policy, because rules and policies are getting disregarded. We have to elect better people. And ultimately, we get the politicians we deserve. And if we vote for people who aren't going to do their job in Congress except be a cheering section for President Trump, and you vote for presidents who are going to ignore the rule of law, that's what you're going to get. And I think when you peel back that onion one layer, I have become convinced in the last couple of years that the two big problems are fragmented information. Conservatives and liberals live in totally different universes, in totally different echo chambers that are radicalizing. And you combine that with gerrymandering, where we create these extreme districts that are essentially one-party districts, where a lawmaker is more worried about losing the primary for being too bipartisan than they are for solving problems. I have been part of Social Security strategy meetings that are bipartisan Republican and Democratic lawmakers. And the first rule of these meetings is a lawmaker say, no one can know I was here, because if my voters find out I'm trying to solve a problem on a bipartisan basis, I'll get thrown out. We need to fix who we elect.
Can I
Sure.
add one sentence?
Yeah.
Jessica says we have to elect better people. I can feel very uncomfortable and a long way out of my lane as an economist, but I'm going to say it nonetheless. I think that means we have to be better people.
Absolutely.
And Frank.
If you haven't already, I would read Justice Gorsuch's concurrence on the tariff decision.
Yeah.
Because he actually chastises Congress for not doing its job. And He says, which is in the Federalist Papers, that Congress is the only body in the country that can be deliberative, that can make compromises, they can trade off different social goods against one another, and they haven't been doing their job. And I think that this decision may have some important long-term consequences in reminding Republican lawmakers of that truth. And as Trump gets weaker, and there's no question this is something that's weakened him, quite substantially, there's going to be more and more defections, I think, from this iron grip that he's held over the Republicans in Congress. And I think, so even before you get to November's election, I think you could see, an erosion, a pretty steady erosion of that consensus.
That's great. I know we have a couple more seconds left, according to this, but please give a round of applause to this panel.